We are back on Inside Politics. Our guest today is David Ewing, a Nashville black historian. David, looking back on local history, there were a lot of people, there were some former slaves and free men who lived in Nashville before the Civil War and then afterwards. Right after the Civil War, given the constitutional amendments that had been passed, did they have a pretty good opportunity to exercise their suffrage without a lot of extra red tape and people trying to keep them from voting?
From a period from 1865 to about 1890 or 1889, yes, African-American men were able to exercise their right to vote due to the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and people were active. We elected African-Americans to the state legislature. Samson Keeble was the first. He was an African-American male from Nashville in 1872, and then 13 were elected for the next 18 years after that.
And then came what was called the poll tax. But you're telling me that the Dortch Law was something even more important, at least here in Tennessee, to suppress suffrage.
Tennessee redid their constitution in 1870, and it provided for a $2 poll tax, which applied to everybody. But in
And $2 was worth what in today's money?
$2 was worth about $60. So would you pay $60 just to vote?
Every election.
Everybody.
Wasn't for you did it and you got it for a whole year. You had to do it every time you went to vote.
I have a copy of two of my great-great-grandfathers. Prince Albert Ewing, who was the first black lawyer here in Nashville. I have his poll tax cards, one from 1880 and one from 1897, and he paid the $2. He was elected in the 1880s for 3 terms as a justice of the peace, so he was very politically involved. But Pat, in 1889, probably one of the worst laws in Tennessee history was this Dortch Law, named after a legislature from Fayette County. And what the Dortch Law did, it took the 2 African-American population counties, Shelby County and Davidson County, and as opposed to having House districts and Senate districts that everyone runs for and gets elected for, both of those counties had at-large elections. So to get elected to the legislature from Memphis or Nashville, those 2 counties, you had to run at large. And since Davidson County was only 25% black and Shelby was only 40%, you did not have African-American representation. And in fact, because of the Dortch Law, we had 0 African-American representation in the legislature from the early 1900s, not until 1964, when 1 black person gets elected from Memphis. The Voting Rights Act passes in 1965, banning this practice of these at-large districts, and then we get 6 African Americans elected to the legislature. So
the earlier Supreme Court ruling that outlawed poll taxes really didn't get rid of it and really didn't do a lot for African American suffrage, as what happened with the voting rights did.
Yeah, the poll tax was appealed in 1953, but basically that did not help get African Americans elected to the legislature.
Are you concerned, in light of some of the recent rulings of the current U.S. Supreme Court, that the Voting Rights Act is basically dead? They recently overturned a three-panel federal jury judges in Alabama that struck down their new redistricting plan for that state, put in the old plan. The judges in Alabama had said it was unconstitutional because it did not allow for enough African American representation in terms of numbers of House seats. Are you concerned that this latest ruling from the court means that the Voting Rights Act is pretty much done?
It's not done, but it's being chipped away, and that's one of the fundamental parts of our democracy and voting is actually access to the ballot box.
Tennessee Democratic Party is going to be challenging the new redistricting plan here in Tennessee. The Republicans who passed it say it meets the law. They say it particularly was racial gerrymandering in their case. Given what the court's ruling, not just as a historian but as a political observer, has this got much chance? Is a lawsuit that the Democrats going to file going to have any chance at all?
Based on other states, probably not, unless they find a smoking gun that said that they drew these lines to disenfranchise, a group of black voters.
Going back into history in terms of suppressing the suffrage, there were not just poll taxes, there were literacy tests. Tell us what those literacy tests was and how they worked.
Well, under the Dortch Law, once again, there was a literacy test because in the old days, a lot of Tennesseans couldn't read a ballot, but the Dortch Law prohibited someone from helping you read your ballot unless you were white. If a poll worker who were white, they could help a white person read their ballot, but they couldn't help a black person. And prior to the Dortch Law, you were just kind of given a ballot and you could bring it with you to the election. The other thing about the Dortch Law that if you can't just tell people to vote for the second name on the ballot, the Dortch Law allowed counties to kind of have 10 or 15 different ballots of just different orders. So you could kind of thwart somebody saying, just check the third name.
You obviously had ancestors who were not afraid to step up and be involved, even though that was perhaps dangerous. In some states, that was, in terms of repression from the Ku Klux Klan, there were also lynchings. Were those two things major problems in Tennessee?
There were. My great-great-grandfather tried to get a job as the postmaster of the Hermitage area and received a threatening letter that if he challenged this ruling to prohibit him, he would be hanging from a cloth rope.
There's also problems when women's suffrage came along. There was concern. People who were against women's suffrage said, well, if you do give it to white women, you're going to have to give it to black women, and you don't want to have that happen. That was, and the movement itself was actually split.
Yeah, and Tennessee was the only state in the Old South to pass the Voting Rights Act. Mississippi and South Carolina in 1920 had a majority African-American population, so people did not want women to get the right to vote because black women would, and they felt that that would help elect black congressmen and senators as we had once did during Reconstruction.
David, I have a feeling what you and I have been talking about today might not fit Governor Lee's idea of teaching American history as being unbiased and non-political in the classrooms, but I guess that's the challenge we face.
Well, it's all of our history. You know, our history is Wilma Rudolph and all these great people in the city. David
Ewing, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. We'll have you back again sometime soon.
Thank you, Pat.
And thank you for joining us on Inside Politics. We'll be back here again for a future show. If you can't get up politics in the meantime, you can go to the News Channel 5 website. You'll find my Capitol News commentary there. There's a new commentary posted every Friday afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you back here next time. Goodbye.